The flight attendant looked down on the man in uniform, completely unaware of his true identity. When James Carter stepped onto the plane in his military uniform, no one could have predicted the events that would unfold next. A flight attendant quickly decided to move him from first class to economy, based solely on his appearance. What she didn't know was that Marcus was not just a soldier, he was the owner of the airline. What happened next would leave everyone astonished, even the flight attendant who had made the biggest mistake of her career. Stay tuned to find out how one wrong move can change the course of everything. Before we begin, please share your thoughts in the comments. Remember to like, share, and subscribe to see more interesting videos. At 12:40, James Carter felt a great pride in his military service. However, today as he boarded the plane, he sensed a distinct change in the atmosphere. His uniform was crisp and clean, every detail meticulously arranged as he walked down the aisle toward his seat in first class. He felt the weight of the stairs pressing down on him. However, he completely ignored the looks from everyone. He was used to it, the way people stared at him. When he wore his uniform, sometimes with respect, sometimes with curiosity or scrutiny, it didn't mean anything to him. He had fulfilled his duty, and that was the most important thing. As he settled into his seat, the gentle hum of the plane and the whispers of passengers surrounded him. He looked around, his calm gaze meeting many curious looks. He welcomed the attention and appreciated the occasional nods of recognition. However, he noticed one thing. Catherine, a flight attendant, seemed to pay more attention to him than the other passengers. She moved purposefully down the aisle, serving drinks with a relaxed smile, but her gaze kept drifting back. To him, she stopped just before reaching his row, her eyes lingering longer than necessary. For a brief moment, Marcus wondered if he was imagining it, but then her lips parted, and she began to speak. "Excuse me, sir," Catherine asked, her tone polite yet sharp. "May I see your boarding pass?" Marcus blinked, surprised by the request. He had had no issues during check-in and certainly didn't think he would be questioned about his seat. He let out a relieved sigh, pulled his boarding pass from his pocket, and handed it to her with a polite nod. "Here you go," he stated, his tone unwavering. Catherine took it and glanced over quickly. Her gaze sharpened as she processed. He thought he might be asked about his seat. He sighed in relief, pulled out his boarding pass from his pocket, and handed it to her with a polite nod. "Here you go," he announced, his tone steady. Catherine took it and glanced quickly over it. Her eyes sharpened as she processed the information. Then she looked up at him. "This is a first-class ticket?" she asked, her tone a bit sharper than she intended. "That's right," Marcus said, his tone still firm but resolute. "That's my seat." She hesitated, running her finger along the boarding pass as if she couldn't believe it. Finally, she handed it back to him, her lips pressed tightly together. "Fine," she replied, her voice cold. After saying that, she turned and walked away. But Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The way she looked at him, the way she seemed to probe his presence, was unlike any interactions he was used to. Having traveled many times, her lips pressed tight. "All right," she replied, her voice cold. After saying that, she turned and walked away. But Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The way she looked at him, the way she seemed to probe his presence, was unlike any interactions he was used to, having traveled many times. He understood that people often jump to conclusions, but this situation felt very different, almost as if she was suspicious of him. As she walked down the aisle, he saw Catherine glance at him again, this time whispering to a nearby flight attendant. He couldn't understand what they were saying, but the interaction felt strange. It seemed like they were talking about him. Although he couldn't grasp why, he brushed it off, focusing on his thoughts as the plane prepared for takeoff. However, as the aircraft ascended into the sky, the unspoken tension between them enveloped the atmosphere. Unnoticed by the other passengers, Minutes passed as the plane took off, and Marcus felt the pleasant rhythm of the flight wrap around him. The gentle hum of the engines and the soft clinking of cups and trays were the only sounds echoing in the cabin. He closed his eyes for a moment, trying to concentrate on his thoughts. Yet, the uneasy feeling stemming from Catherine's question lingered in his mind. He had experienced many flights before, but this one had a distinctly different atmosphere. The whispered conversations, the fleeting glances between passengers, and the strange exchanges with Catherine began to occur more frequently. As for Catherine, she seemed lost in her own thoughts. She moved through the aisles with a stiffness and efficiency almost mechanical, chatting lightly with passengers and serving drinks with a smile that seemed to lack genuine warmth. Every time she passed by Marcus's seat, her gaze would turn towards him, and each time Marcus would respond with a polite but detached expression, she decided not to continue talking to him. But he still felt a distinct tension between them. It felt like there was an unspoken truth, something deeper hidden just beneath the surface. Soon, Catherine returned. This time, she moved with a different rhythm, not the quick, efficient pace of a flight attendant on duty. Her steps were more purposeful, a sense of determination. Prompting Marcus to sit up straight in his seat, she walked right up to him, stopping directly in front of him, blocking his view of the cabin. "Mr. Williams?" Catherine said, her voice tense. "May I have a moment of your time?" Marcus raised an eyebrow, surprised to see her speaking to him. Again, he hesitated to respond, unsure of her intentions. "Sure," he finally replied, his tone still calm. Even though a growing discomfort was bubbling up inside him, Catherine gestured for him to stand and follow her to the galley, and he complied, though he felt uncertain about the current situation. As he walked through the cabin, Marcus felt the eyes of the passengers on him. Whispers began to rise again, this time clearer as the flight attendants exchanged knowing looks. He remained unshaken, keeping a calm expression. The atmosphere was thick with tension. He felt that something was happening, an event that would change the course of this journey. Upon reaching the galley, Catherine faced him, her posture straight and her expression resolute. "I'm sorry, but I have to ask you to change your seat," she said, her voice cold. "It seems there was an error with your reservation." Marcus stared in confusion. "An error?" he asked, though skepticism still lingered in his mind about what he was hearing. "I booked this flight weeks ago, and all the details were confirmed. I'm not sure what the issue is." Catherine's gaze sharpened, but she remained firm. "I've checked," she said, her tone growing more assertive. "This seat is not suitable for you. Please move to the back of the plane. There's an available spot for you in economy." Those words hung in the air for a moment, and Marcus felt his cheeks flush. There were times he almost spoke up, but then he held back. He realized this wasn't just a simple mistake. Catherine wasn't just asking him to relocate. She was paying attention to him. However, he didn't respond with anger. Instead, he remained still, lost in thought as he tried to understand what was happening. "I don't understand," he said, his voice calm but still tinged with doubt. "My ticket is confirmed as valid. I don't see the necessity to move." He hesitated, glancing at her expression for signs of understanding, but saw nothing. Catherine's demeanor was cold, almost indifferent. Without saying another word, Catherine turned and began walking towards the back of the plane. Assuming that he would follow her, Marcus paused for a moment, his thoughts racing. This wasn't just a simple mistake. This was an experience with much greater significance, deeply personal. As he picked up his carry-on and trudged after Catherine, the whispers in the cabin grew louder, and he felt the weight of every gaze directed at him. Confusion was evident, but he was determined not to show it. With each step he took, the whispers in the cabin seemed to grow even louder. As he moved towards the back of the plane alongside Catherine, he realized this wasn't merely about changing seats. This was a much more deliberate act, significantly more strategic. Catherine had no idea she was about to discover exactly who she was dealing with. Marcus settled into the cramped economy seat, his actions measured and calm. The space felt tight, almost stifling, in stark contrast to the comfort he had enjoyed in first class. There was a power in first class that was far greater than she could imagine. He placed his bag under the seat in front of him. His hands relaxed as he sat up straight. He could feel the eyes of the other passengers on him, the whispers following every move he made. They felt curious. Some seemed sympathetic, while others were uncertain about what had just happened. But Marcus remained unfazed, his gaze still forward while the flight maintained its steady course. Meanwhile, Catherine continued to fulfill her duties in front of the plane. She tried to maintain a professional attitude. She walked down the aisle, serving drinks and smiling at the passengers. However, there was an unmistakable tension that accompanied each of her movements. Each time she glanced toward the back of the plane, her restlessness grew. Her gaze lingered a little longer on Marcus, who was sitting calmly in the middle of the row, the picture of tranquility. Despite the circumstances, a sense of guilt began to creep in. Catherine couldn't shake the persistent feeling that she had made a mistake. Even though she tried to fully acknowledge it, her actions were instinctive, believing that Marcus didn't belong in first class. After all, soldiers like him weren't supposed to be there. Right. She didn't think twice when she moved him. It seemed like the right thing to do, a standard aspect of her responsibilities. However, when she saw him sitting at the back of the plane, a feeling of unease surged in her chest. The first-class passengers, who had previously been unaware of what was happening, began exchanging glances, the atmosphere growing increasingly tense. While some sensed the calmness with which Marcus accepted his fate, only a few understood the severity of the situation. Not at that moment. Catherine's doubts started to become clear. Her usual confidence was waning, and with each passing minute, she began to feel that something was off. Yet, she still didn't realize the extent of her mistake. Soon after, the intercom crackled to life, signaling that a message was being sent. The calm, steady voice of the captain echoed throughout the cabin, reminding passengers of safety procedures. But for Catherine, it felt like a faint echo, merely background noise to the storm brewing in her mind. She couldn't shake off the persistent feeling that Marcus was holding secrets deeper than what she could see at that moment. Catherine made her way to the galley, her mind racing. The discomfort was gradually turning into a heavier feeling, one she couldn't ignore any longer. She tried to focus on her responsibilities, but her thoughts kept drifting back to Marcus. His calmness in handling the situation suggested he had knowledge that she didn't. Truly a soldier, yet there was still a distinct quality about him that seemed very unique. Thoughts swirled in her mind. Was he really just a soldier, or was he a significant figure? Someone with connections that she hadn't noticed. A thought began to form in her head, but she quickly dismissed it. It couldn't possibly be true. Right. Catherine picked up her phone, her hand trembling slightly as she unlocked it. She accessed the airline seating chart, searching for any information about Marcus's full name. She quickly scanned the list, finding nothing of interest. But then she hesitated. His name was James Carter. She paused, staring at the screen, her eyes widening as she realized something. It hit her as a surprise and a powerful realization. James Carter wasn't just the soldier. He is James Carter, the owner of an airline, frequently making headlines due to his business efforts, military background, and prominent connections. Her heart sank. She had just moved a passenger from the airline to the back of the plane. A wave of anxiety washed over her as she began to realize the consequences of her choices. The man she thought was just an ordinary soldier, unworthy of consideration. Catherine's hands shook as she shoved her phone back into her pocket, her mind flooded with worry. What had she done? What would happen next? Catherine felt a wave of nausea as she tried to keep her balance. But the truth was, her mistake was now irreparable. She had crossed a line, and the repercussions of her choices were about to unfold in ways she could never have anticipated. Catherine's thoughts spun as she tried to focus on her responsibilities. She walked down the aisle, serving drinks and smiling at passengers. Yet, this effort felt futile. Her mind kept drifting back to Marcus. She couldn't help but imagine the expression on his face when he found out who she had just moved. Would he really be angry? Or was he just stalling, knowing that eventually she would have to face the consequences of her mistake? The questions nagged at her, and with every step, the weight of her choices grew heavier. The flight felt endless, with each moment stretching longer than the last. Catherine kept glancing toward the back of the plane, eager to see Marcus's reaction. He remained composed, never losing his cool or raising his voice. Surprisingly, he seemed remarkably calm, yet this only heightened Catherine's anxiety. She anticipated his objections, even his anger, but he had agreed without hesitation. This made her wonder, is he playing a game I can't quite understand with each passing moment as I take on this responsibility? Her discomfort grew each time she passed by Marcus. He remained poised, as if anticipating an inevitable event. She couldn't shake the feeling that her actions were far more serious than just moving a passenger from one seat to another. She had made a judgment, a snap decision based on an assumption. Now that assumption loomed over her like a dreadful shadow. The whispers around the cabin began to grow louder. The first-class passengers started murmuring to each other, their curiosity heightened by the events that had unfolded earlier. Some felt sympathy for Marcus, recognizing the unfairness of the situation, while others felt confused, uncertain about what was happening. It was clear that Catherine's actions had caused a disruption larger than she had anticipated. The confidence she once had was now shaky, and her thoughts spiraled wildly, her gaze anxiously drifting toward Marcus's seat in the back, just as Catherine began to feel the weight of the situation pressing down on her. The intercom crackled to life again. Once more, the captain's voice echoed throughout the cabin. "Dear passengers, we sincerely thank you for choosing to fly with us today. We believe you will have an enjoyable flight. If you need any assistance, please notify one of our team members." However, Catherine barely registered this announcement. Her thoughts drifted back to Marcus. The plane seemed to hold still in anticipation, the atmosphere heavy with anxiety. She felt the passengers' eyes on her as they began piecing together the details of the mystery. An event had occurred. There was an unsettling feeling, and Marcus was aware of it. Soon after, Catherine's phone rang again. This time, the notification flashing on the screen left her paralyzed. It originated from the airline's main office. "Please report to the kitchen immediately. This matter needs urgent attention." Catherine felt a pit in her stomach. The communication was unmistakable. Something was wrong, and now she had to face the consequences. The journey had taken an unforeseen turn, and she realized this was just the beginning. With trembling hands, she forced herself to move forward. As she headed toward the kitchen, her mind swirled with potential outcomes. Had she missed the chance to rectify her actions? Could she resolve the situation before the truth came to light? Or could this be the moment that jeopardized all her efforts? Upon reaching the kitchen, she found her manager, Michael Hayes, waiting for her. His expression was calm, but the intensity in his eyes made Catherine's heart race. At first, he was silent and simply handed her the phone. "This is for you," he whispered gently. Catherine's hands trembled as she reached for the phone. She braced herself for what was about to happen, feeling unprepared for it. As she lifted the receiver to her ear, the voice on the other end sent chills down her spine. "You have reached the airline's operations office. There has been a report just submitted regarding a first-class passenger you moved during the flight. Please prepare a comprehensive report on the situation upon our arrival." Catherine felt her throat go dry. "Excuse me, what happened?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. After a brief silence, the voice on the line answered, "The passenger you moved, his name is James Carter. He owns this airline." Those words hit her like a punch to the gut. James Carter was not just an ordinary soldier. He owned the airline. It was James Carter, who remained calm. At the back of the plane, not raising his voice or causing a scene. Catherine felt a wave of weakness wash over her as she realized this. She had just made the gravest mistake of her life, and now there was no way to fix it. Catherine remained frozen in the kitchen, her fingers gripping the phone tightly as the voice on the line continued speaking. Catherine, it is crucial for you to recognize the seriousness of the situation. James Carter holds a significant stake and plays a vital role in this airline. He is not just as a passenger. Your experience is our top priority. Those words echoed in Catherine's mind, but they didn't fully sink in. She knew very well who James Carter was. After all, everyone knows him. He's a prominent name in the business world, someone with influence that extends far beyond the aviation industry. But she never imagined that the calm, composed man in first class could actually be him. The thought that she had placed him sitting at the back of the plane based on her assumptions seemed utterly ridiculous. And yet, here they were, her stomach twisted as the weight of her mistake wrapped around her like a heavy shroud. Standing there, she could feel her colleagues' gazes on her, a heavy sensation rising in her stomach. From his vantage point in the corner of the kitchen, Michael Hayes seemed to grasp the situation immediately. His expression was hard to read, but the slight tilt of his head and the quiet caution in his eyes were unmistakable. Catherine tried to focus on the voice on the phone as she continued guiding. She caught bits of the conversation. A report needed to be written. Make sure you apologize immediately. Otherwise, i.e., if it's not handled properly, things could get worse. Yet all of this just became background noise beneath the wave of regret rising inside her. Her bias had clouded her judgment, and now that couldn't be changed. After the call ended, Catherine gently put down the phone, her hands trembling, her mind still spinning, trying to make sense of it all. How could she let this happen? How could she make such a serious mistake without realizing the consequences? She had made assumptions and judged Marcus by his appearance, and now she was paying the price. That truth hit her like a punch to the heart. She found herself in a much more serious situation than she had ever expected. Are you okay? Michael Hayes asked gently, his voice filled with concern. Catherine didn't answer right away. She was trying to calm herself down, but it seemed impossible. The room was spinning around her, her thoughts in chaos. This has to be dealt with. It has to be fixed. I don't know anything, Catherine whispered, her voice heavy with stress. I don't understand who he is. Her words felt empty, meaningless, yet she said them in a desperate attempt to find any reasoning that could ease the weight of this moment. At first, Michael Hayes was silent, just nodding, but the look in his eyes said everything Catherine needed to understand. You made a mistake, Catherine, he said softly. A big one. You really should hope you didn't just cross paths with someone you shouldn't have. The weight in his words wrapped around Catherine like a cold shiver. She realized that Michael Hayes, with all his experience, had grasped just how serious this situation was. At first, Michael Hayes remained silent, just nodding. However, the expression in his eyes conveyed everything Catherine needed to understand. You've made a mistake, Catherine, he said gently. A big mistake. You really should hope that you haven't just crossed paths with someone you shouldn't have. The weight of his words enveloped Catherine like a chilling shiver. She realized that Michael Hayes, with his vast experience, had grasped the seriousness of the situation. Her mistake wasn't just a minor setback. It wasn't simply about transporting a passenger. She had offended someone powerful, and that could complicate her life in ways she couldn't yet comprehend. She had offended someone powerful, and that could complicate her life in ways she couldn't yet comprehend. All she could do now was brace herself for the consequences to come. She has offended someone in power, and that could complicate her life in ways she can't even begin to understand. All she can do now is brace herself for the consequences that are about to come. The air in the kitchen felt stifling. Catherine tried to focus on the other flight attendants as they carried out their duties, gliding past her with precision and calm. They moved past her with precision and calm. She remained seated in the corner of the room, her hands gripping the counter tightly, her thoughts swirling around the consequences of her choices. She felt completely out of control. The situation had spiraled beyond her grasp, and all she could do was hope it wouldn't lead to total loss. Minutes passed as the airplane continued its steady flight through the sky. Catherine tried to focus on her tasks, her serving drinks and making polite conversation with passengers. However, she felt Marcus's presence looming over her like a dark cloud, a constant reminder of her mistake. Every time she walked past him, her stomach tightened. He stood there, expressionless, as if the events unfolding on the flight didn't affect him at all. Yet, Catherine sensed the truth. She could feel it in the atmosphere. A storm was brewing, and it was not good for her. As the flight continued, the weight of Catherine's mistake grew heavier with each passing moment. Her movements had become mechanical. The confident stride she once had now felt stiff and clumsy as she moved through the aisles to serve the passengers. Her smile seemed hollow, as if she were masquerading as someone completely different. Her thoughts constantly drifted back to Marcus, and every time she passed him, she felt like he was watching her, tracking her every move, waiting for the moment fate would inevitably confront her. The tension in the cabin was rising. The passengers, who had previously been unaware of the underlying tension between the flight attendants, were beginning to sense it. Soft whispers started to echo down the aisle. Curious glances exchanged between a first-class and economy passengers. A few noticed the slight tremor in Catherine's hands as she served drinks, or the way she darted anxious glances every time she passed by Marcus. At 11:38 p.m., some passengers exchanged subtle looks, realizing something was wrong. Even if they couldn't quite grasp what was happening, Catherine felt an increasing discomfort that she couldn't ignore. Her anxiety had reached a critical level and was becoming more apparent. Her mind was flooded with possible outcomes. What would happen when they landed? Would Marcus file a complaint? Was he determined to do so? As she pondered further, she realized it was inevitable what was about to happen. The only question was how much this would impact her career. In her mind, Michael Hayes's warning echoed continuously. "You really should hope you haven't upset anyone." Those words played over and over in her head, like a persistent tune. Deep down, she was fully aware that she had crossed a line she should have respected. She had made judgments about Marcus based on his appearance, and those judgments had consequences for her. Turning back was not an option. As the plane continued its journey, Catherine felt her restlessness growing. Each time she spotted Marcus in the middle row of economy, his calm demeanor only heightened her anxiety. He didn't seem angry or sad. He remained silent, as if nothing was happening. It felt as if he possessed knowledge she didn't have, as if he was fully aware of his impact in this situation, biding his time for the perfect moment to act. That thought sent a shiver down her spine. Meanwhile, Marcus remained completely unfazed. He sensed the tension in the air, but he managed to mask it. He had mastered the art of controlling his emotions long ago, especially in circumstances like this. Catherine's perception of him was hardly surprising. Throughout his life, he had faced bias and criticism, yet he never let that bother him. Today was just like any other day. He understood he had the power to change the situation. However, he realized that the most effective approach was to remain calm and wait for the right moment. The most effective approach was to remain calm and wait for the right moment. As Marcus sat looking out the window, he felt his phone vibrating gently in his pocket. He glanced down and noticed a message from his assistant. "Everything is ready. Just let me know when you're set." A subtle smile crept onto his lips. He had proactively ensured that this situation would not go unnoticed. Catherine and the airline would soon understand the significant impact of their actions. However, Catherine remained unaware of Marcus's intentions. She moved deeper into the cabin, trying to keep her composure, but the weight of her guilt grew heavier. Each time she passed Marcus, she felt her chest tighten, as if she were being suffocated by the burden of her mistake. She had no idea how this would end. Yet, one thing was undeniable. Her life was on the brink of change. As the flight continued, Catherine realized she was struggling to concentrate. The gentle hum of the airplane, once a soothing background noise, now seemed overwhelmingly loud. Every minute felt like it was dragging on, the clock in her mind ticking with each passing second. She couldn't shake the feeling that something important was about to happen. Her entire career, reputation, and everything she had worked for were hanging by a thread, all depending on a hasty decision made based on assumptions. Up at the front of the plane, Marcus still sat in his seat, wearing a calm expression. Catherine's anxiety grew as she faced his calm demeanor. She was amazed by his ability to stay composed after everything that had happened. It felt like he had knowledge she didn't possess. He seemed to be waiting for the moment when everything would fall apart. He was right. It was only a matter of time. The first-class passengers, who had previously been engrossed in chatter or entertainment during the flight, were now noticeably more alert. Catherine felt the whispers growing louder, and a wave of unease surged within her, as if she were being watched in every corner. The slight shift in the cabin's atmosphere sent chills down her spine. She sensed something was approaching. The slight shift in the cabin's atmosphere sent chills down her spine. She felt like she was being watched in every corner. However, she was still unsure about her level of responsibility or what she would face when the flight landed. As Catherine walked past Marcus again, a knot tightened in her stomach. He remained comfortably seated in the back while she was filled with anxiety. His silence only added to her worry. However, there was another factor, one that made her heart race with worry. Had he made a call? Was he in contact with someone higher up at the airline? That thought made her shiver. She noticed the other flight attendants and observed the cautious glances they directed toward her. They felt it too. The intensity of the tension was rising. Catherine's train of thought was interrupted by another chime from the intercom system. But this time, the captain's tone conveyed a greater sense of urgency. "Dear passengers, we sincerely appreciate your choice to fly with us. Today, if you need any assistance, please reach out to any member of our team." This announcement was standard, but it seemed to emphasize the growing discomfort among the passengers in the cabin. Catherine, still confused by her earlier encounter with Marcus, tried to focus on drinks were about to be called. But her mind kept wandering. As she approached the kitchen to prepare for the upcoming event, her phone rang again. This time, it wasn't just a simple message. Catherine felt her heart race as she saw the number displayed on the screen. It was the executive office of the airline, the same office that had reached out before. This wasn't just a polite phone call. This was serious. She paused before answering, her anxiety spiking. "This is Catherine," she said, trying to stay calm. The tone from the other side was very firm and straightforward. "Catherine, we've just received a report about a situation involving a first-class passenger. Please report to the kitchen immediately. You need to face this situation directly." Catherine felt her heart race as the seriousness of the situation hit her immediately. She already knew who the passenger was without needing to be told. It was Marcus who had caused this. No matter what was about to happen, it was definitely not going to be good for her. When Catherine arrived at the kitchen, she found Michael Hayes there with a grim expression. He didn't need to say anything. The look in his eyes said everything she needed to understand. "Catherine," he began gently, "you need to prepare yourself. This is more important than you think." Catherine took a deep breath. Her stomach sank. She realized that the consequences of her choices were much more serious than she had ever anticipated. Finally, she grasped the reality of the situation. But it was too late to undo the damage done. She had made a grave mistake. And Marcus was not an ordinary passenger. He had connections, power, and influence factors that Catherine had completely underestimated. With a heavy heart, Catherine turned to look at the doorway leading to the cockpit, where she would meet the captain. The uneasy feeling in her chest became clear, and she realized that everything had changed irreparably. Catherine took a deep breath as she approached the cockpit, feeling the weight of each step growing heavier. The severity of the situation was immense, but there was no turning back now. Her heart pounded in her chest, and the tension in her hands made her grip the doorframe tightly as she reached for the doorknob. As she stepped into the cockpit, the captain, named Harris, turned to look at her. His calm presence a stark contrast to the turmoil rising within her. "Please, have a seat, Catherine," Robert Evans said. In a steady, soothing tone, he gestured toward the chair opposite him. His unmistakably authoritative voice only added to the tension that Catherine was experiencing. Catherine sat down, her knees shaking slightly as she slowly lowered herself. She hesitated to respond because she didn't know what words to choose. The captain's gaze remained calm, as if he was waiting for her explanation. "Catherine," Robert Evans said, his voice taking on a serious tone, "do you know the identity of the passenger you moved earlier?" Catherine nodded slowly, her throat dry. "Yes, sir. I just found out it was James Carter." The captain's face remained expressionless, but a distinct change appeared in his eyes. He spoke with a controlled tone of concern, emphasizing the seriousness of her actions. "James Carter plays a significant role, not just as a bystander. This airline is owned by him. He holds a controlling stake and does not tolerate disrespect. Have you considered the potential impact this could have on you?" Those words hit Catherine like a ton of bricks. Her stomach dropped, and she struggled to control her trembling. She was completely unaware of the situation she was in. She had charmed a man with power and influence beyond what she had ever imagined. At this moment, she was facing the consequences. "I had no idea," Catherine mumbled, her voice barely a whisper. "I rushed to conclusions. I thought he was just a soldier. I didn't realize his true identity. I never meant to be disrespectful to him." Robert Evans leaned forward, his gaze sharp. "Catherine, making such assumptions could ruin your career. You not only showed disrespect to the passenger, but also to the owner of this airline. It's important for you to recognize that this will not be overlooked. As soon as we arrive, we will address this situation. A comprehensive report on the events will be necessary, and we will evaluate the situation from that point onward." A lump formed in Catherine's throat. She had heard of others facing consequences for similar mistakes, but she never thought she would be the one to bear the consequences. In her dedication to her job and adhering to protocol, she had overlooked the deeper implications. Now it was too late. Robert Evans stood up, his demeanor slightly more relaxed. However, the seriousness of the matter was unmistakable. He instructed her to return to her duties right now, but made it clear that this was not an issue we could ignore. James Carter was someone who would persist in pursuing this matter, and she should too. Catherine stood up, her legs trembling as she made her way back to the kitchen. The captain's voice echoed in her mind, and with each step, the weight of her mistake grew heavier. She realized that her choices had initiated a chain of events beyond her control, and now she had to face the consequences. As she returned to the cabin, her anxious gaze landed on Marcus. He was still sitting in the back, relaxed. However, she could feel his strong presence. She understood that she was not just a passenger. The tense atmosphere enveloped her, and Catherine couldn't shake the feeling that her world was on the brink of collapse. The journey was far from over, and the repercussions of her mistake were just beginning to unfold. Catherine's hands trembled as she returned to the kitchen. She tried to focus on her duties, serving drinks and engaging in polite conversation with passengers. However, the weight of her mistake loomed over every interaction. The gravity of the captain's words pressed down on her chest. She began to understand the consequences of her actions, and no ordinary conversation or distraction could ease her thoughts. She knew that the hours ahead would stretch on endlessly, and the impending consequences seemed unavoidable. Her gaze shifted to the back of the plane once more, immediately focusing on Marcus. He was still seated, looking out the window. To everyone else, he seemed like any other traveler. However, now Catherine understood more deeply. The image of the man she had encountered earlier was burned into her memory. He was not just a soldier. Contrary to her initial assumptions, he was the owner of the airline. Deep down, Catherine felt the alarm bells ringing louder and louder. With every passing moment, she had ventured into a territory that until now she had not fully grasped, and the consequences were becoming more and more apparent. More clearly, as Catherine continued to carry out her duties, she sensed a change in her surroundings. The other flight attendants seemed to subtly keep their distance from her. The cheerful expressions had vanished, replaced by tired but polite faces. She noticed Michael Hayes watching her from across the galley, his face clearly showing concern. The atmosphere among the crew members was tense, even without a word being spoken, and the unspoken tension surrounded her, indicating that the news had spread. Everyone felt that something was off, even though they were still uncertain about Marcus's involvement in this situation. Meanwhile, Marcus sat calmly at the back, his demeanor steady and unwavering, even though he spoke little. His presence easily drew the attention of everyone around him. Catherine couldn't quite grasp his thoughts, but she felt them deeply, like the calm before the storm. He understood that his calm exterior was not just an act. This decision was calculated and carefully planned. Marcus was very familiar with this situation, where people jumped to conclusions, believing they understood everything about him just based on his appearance. Yet, he handled these situations calmly, avoiding any conflict or drama. He had already made the call. Marcus noticed the whispers rising behind him as he boarded the plane. Although his reaction wasn't what Catherine expected, he had started taking steps to ensure that this incident would not be overlooked. A short call to his assistant had initiated this process. He was determined not to let the flight attendant's mistake slide, especially when it was based solely on bias. He didn't need to make the situation more tense, at least not right now. However, he understood that changes were necessary afterward. The way he was treated by being moved to the back of the plane was unacceptable, and he was determined to ensure there would be consequences. As the flight continued, the roar of the engines filled the cabin, a sound that had previously brought comfort but now weighed heavily on Catherine. She couldn't shake the notion that every action she had taken up to this point was just a series of mistakes that would surely lead to her downfall. Every time she looked at Marcus, she realized he was a man who was not just a soldier or a traveler. He was someone who had quietly set in motion a chain of events that would soon expose her mistakes to everyone. In the meantime, Catherine tried to regain her composure, serving drinks and attending to passengers as if everything was perfectly fine. However, her thoughts continually drifted toward Marcus, her mind swirling with endless possibilities. The seriousness of the situation weighed on her. She could maintain the appearance. Marcus. Her mind was swirling with endless possibilities. The gravity of the situation weighed heavily on her. She could maintain her composure. But for how much longer? The truth was, everything was not okay. It hadn't been for a while. Catherine had reached a point of no return with her decision. Now it was time to face the consequences. She didn't know just how hard things were about to get. Would she lose her job? Would she face punishment or something even worse? Doubt consumed her with every passing second. At the back of the plane, Marcus's phone buzzed once more. He looked at the screen and saw a message from the assistant that everything was ready for them. As the wheels began to move, Marcus felt a gentle wave of satisfaction wash over him. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about ensuring that actions like this would not happen again. By the time this flight landed, Catherine would gain a deeper understanding of the power dynamics she had previously overlooked. Catherine found the end of the journey to be quite prolonged. With each passing minute, her fear grew stronger. The mood in the cabin had shifted. Passengers were increasingly aware of her anxious energy. Some seemed understanding, while others were more curious, trying to figure out the situation. They knew nothing about what was happening, yet they sensed that something was off. With each step down the aisle, Catherine felt an invisible gaze following her. They would land soon, and she felt a deep sense of unease in her stomach, realizing that everything would change once they touched down. As the plane neared its destination, Catherine felt her anxiety escalating. Tightening her chest, the familiar sound of the seatbelt sign along with last-minute preparations for landing only heightened her worry. The cabin was bustling with passengers organizing their belongings and getting ready to disembark. But for Catherine, it felt like noise, a faint rustling drowning out the storm brewing just beneath the surface. She understood that as soon as they landed, everything around her would come crashing down, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. She glanced at Marcus again. His calm demeanor was in stark contrast to the chaos within her. He remained poised since the last time she saw him, sitting there with his gaze directed out the window. However, Catherine understood that his serenity was merely a facade. It wasn't the calm of someone who had been treated fairly. It was the calm of someone who knew they were of chaos spun inside her. He remained in the same position since the last time she saw him, sitting there with his gaze directed out the window. However, Catherine understood that the calmness in his demeanor was just a facade. It wasn't the calmness of someone who had been treated fairly. It was the calmness of someone who knew they were in control of the situation, someone who had meticulously planned this entire scenario. And Catherine had unwittingly fallen into his trap. Passengers began rearranging their seats and preparing to disembark. The familiar thrill of reaching their destination was still evident, yet Catherine couldn't shake the uncomfortable feeling in her gut. She walked around the cabin, ensuring seatbelts were fastened and making light conversation. However, every interaction felt insincere. Her mind was overwhelmed as she realized she had made a mistake. The consequences were now inevitable. The looks and polite smiles from every passenger were a constant reminder of the blunder she had made. She felt the palpable tension surrounding her. The travelers began to sense it too. The whispers had subsided, but the exchanged glances hinted at a shared understanding. They began connecting the dots. While the whole story remained a mystery, it was clear that something was wrong, and Catherine was most aware of that. The captain's final announcement interrupted her train of thought. "Please note, we are beginning our descent. Make sure your seatbelts are fastened and your trays are stowed away. We'll be landing shortly." The calm and professional demeanor of the captain was in stark contrast to the chaos inside Catherine. The seriousness in his words weighed on her, a silent reminder that time was running out. Catherine returned to the kitchen, looking for a moment to calm herself, a brief pause to regain her composure before everything began to unfold. However, as she reached the back of the plane, a familiar voice stopped her. "Catherine," Michael Hayes said, his tone serious, "please come to the cockpit. Immediately, the captain wants to speak with you." Her heart raced with excitement. She understood the significance of this. This was a discussion she couldn't avoid. Although she wanted to delay the inevitable, she had no choice but to face whatever was about to happen. The situation. Catherine felt her throat tighten. She had anticipated this moment, but it still overwhelmed her. She stepped in, the door closing gently behind her as she sat across from the captain. For the first time, she truly felt the weight of her mistake, realizing that her career, her entire future with the airline, hinged on a single impulsive choice made without fully understanding the implications for those involved, was utterly the situation. Catherine felt her throat tighten. She had anticipated this moment, but it still overwhelmed her. She stepped in, the door closing gently behind her as she sat down facing the captain. For the first time, she truly felt the weight of her mistake, realizing that her career, her entire future with the airline, depended on a single impulsive choice made without fully understanding the nature of those involved was truly overwhelming. Robert Evans stared at her for a long moment before he began to speak. "We have been informed by the company office. James Carter has filed an official complaint. The board has been notified. This situation will not be easy to resolve." Those words echoed, each one driving a nail deeper into her heart. She had been aware of the severity of the issue, but hearing it spoken aloud made her realize the reality. This wasn't a trivial matter. This incident marked an escalation, a scenario that could potentially shake the entire airline in ways she hadn't foreseen. The executive team would not overlook this. And Marcus was certainly not someone who would easily dismiss any disrespect. Robert Evans continued, his tone still steady but authoritative. Section 45116. You need to prepare a comprehensive report outlining your actions. The airline is taking this matter very seriously and will conduct a thorough review of every aspect involved. He hesitated, observing her closely. This could lead to disciplinary action. Catherine, the board has a zero-tolerance policy for mistakes like this. It's important to understand that Catherine felt the weight of his words. But they were nothing compared to the suffocating truth that had settled in her heart. She had underestimated Marcus. And now she was on the brink of having to face the consequences, was overwhelmed with a deep and intense sense of regret. What had initially seemed like a trivial decision to move a passenger to another seat had turned into a terrifying challenge that would affect her life forever. She had believed Marcus was just an ordinary soldier. She thought he didn't belong in first class. Now she had to face the consequences of those assumptions. The plane's wheels touched down, creating a soft noise. Catherine understood that once the door opened, everything in her life would change forever. The truth about her actions had seeped into her mind, and the chaos that was about to unfold was unavoidable. The plane landed gently, but to Catherine, it felt as if the ground beneath her was shifting. As the cabin door opened, a cold wave of reality crashed over her. Passengers began unbuckling their seatbelts, gathering their belongings, and chatting with one another. However, Catherine's thoughts were far removed from her usual routines. She moved with a sense of detachment, trying to focus on her duties, yet Taranum. The weight of the earlier discussion with Robert Evans hung over her like a tangible burden. The crew worked quickly to prepare for the disembarkation process. However, Catherine couldn't shake the feeling that those around her were more perceptive than they appeared. The passengers, some still seated, looked at her with curious gazes. The seriousness of the situation was clear, even though they lacked the full information, but Catherine felt it deeply in her soul. An event was about to unfold, a circumstance beyond control. Her anxious gaze turned toward Marcus, who was gathering his belongings. He seemed unhurried, savoring each moment, but his calm only heightened the chaos inside her. She could almost sense his thoughts. Now I recognize you. As Catherine approached the galley to retrieve her things, a voice called out from behind her. She glanced back and saw two airport security officers walking toward her, their uniforms crisp and their faces incredulous. At first, they remained silent, but just seeing them was enough to tighten Catherine's stomach. A chill ran down her spine as one of the officers approached, causing cold sweat to beat on her neck. "Are you Emily Thompson?" the officer asked, his tone both authoritative and gentle. One of the officers approached, causing a cold sweat to break out on the back of her neck. "Are you Emily Thompson?" the officer asked, his tone both authoritative and gentle. Catherine stood still, her throat dry as she tried to nod slightly. "Yes," she replied softly, her voice trembling. "We respectfully request that you come with us." The officer insisted, "We need to talk to you." Catherine's heart raced. The anxiety she had tried to shake off was now undeniable. Her breath became rapid as she followed them to the exit. The eyes of the passengers turned toward her, both curious and suspicious. She could imagine the whispers spreading through the crowd. It was the flight attendant's fault. Was becoming undeniable. Her breath quickened as she shuffled behind them toward the exit. The passengers' eyes were on her, both curious and suspicious. She could imagine the whispers spreading through the crowd. It was the flight attendant who had made a mistake. As she got off the plane and entered the terminal, Catherine's thoughts became chaotic. She had no idea what would happen next. However, the presence of the police officer conveyed all the information she needed. The airline was taking this matter seriously. Marcus had ensured that the journey to the security office felt endless, with each step pulling her further away from the life she once knew. When they arrived at the sterile little room assigned for the officers to talk to her, Catherine felt her world beginning to collapse. This was the moment. She had gone too far, and now there was no way to turn back. The officer closed the door behind her, Leaving Catherine standing before a modest table, they gestured for her to sit down, and she complied, her hands trembling as they rested on her lap. For a brief moment, the room fell silent until one officer spoke, breaking the stillness with a calm yet authoritative tone. 49 minutes and 52 seconds past the hour. We were informed of an incident involving Flight 287. He requested an explanation for her actions on that flight. Catherine parted her lips to speak, but found herself momentarily at a loss for words. She took a deep breath and tried again. I moved a passenger from first class to economy. I believe there was an error with his booking. The officer did not respond immediately. He simply stared at her, his gaze unwavering, as if he expected her to grasp the seriousness of his words. Catherine's words felt weak and fragile in the silence that followed. You moved him, the officer stated deliberately, because he believed he did not deserve first class. Catherine nodded in acknowledgement, her throat tightening. Actually, I thought he was just a soldier. She hesitated, her voice quaking. The officer leaned slightly forward, his expression sharpening. Do you know the identity of that passenger? Catherine shook her head, her heart pounding in her chest. I only found out later. The officer's face darkened. The person you relocated is James Carter. He is the owner of this airline, a key stakeholder, and one of the senior executives. Are you aware of the seriousness of your actions? Catherine felt a chill run down her spine. She felt the walls of the room closing in on her. Her throat felt dry as she struggled to articulate her thoughts. I had no idea. I didn't mean to. The officer raised his hand to signal her to stop. This is not just a mistake. Catherine, you have embarrassed a prominent member of the aviation industry. The board has been informed and is currently reviewing your actions. This could lead to disciplinary measures. Catherine felt dizzy. She had no idea how quickly things had spiraled out of control. She thought she was just doing her job by following routine. But now, everything she had worked for, everything she had built, was under threat. The officer's tone softened a bit, but his words still carried such weight. A comprehensive report is necessary. Please note that this matter will be handled extremely seriously. We will contact you after the evaluation process is complete. As the officers began to leave, Catherine felt utterly ashamed. When the door closed behind them, she found herself alone in the cramped room, the weight of the situation pressing down on her like a constant strain. She sank into the chair, her thoughts swirling. I've messed everything up. The realization of her actions echoed relentlessly in her mind as the gravity of what she had done began to settle in. She had no idea what was about to happen. However, one thing was clear. Her life had completely changed, and there was no turning back. Catherine found herself in a daze. Her thoughts became chaotic in a haze. As the door closed behind the security personnel, she felt utterly alone, engulfed in anxiety. The silence was overwhelming. Every passing minute felt like it stretched on forever. She could have never predicted that a seemingly simple choice, to move a passenger and make an assumption, could lead to this outcome. She had only seen it as a mistake, yet the severity of the issue seemed much deeper. The truth about James Carter's power hit her like a jolt of electricity. She continuously replayed that moment in her mind. At 53 minutes and 25 seconds, Marcus's calm demeanor while presenting the boarding pass was remarkable. Her decision to seat him in first class was a mistake. She had easily influenced him without a second thought. In that moment, everything felt incredibly normal. However, she had no idea that she was dealing with a man whose influence extended far beyond his position on the plane. He had total control over the entire airline. She began to grasp the consequences of her actions. She had offended the airline's owner, a person who not only had the power to terminate her employment, but could also amplify this mistake throughout the company. Catherine felt the board members' watchful eyes, their judgment hanging in the air. She didn't know what would happen next, but she understood that it wouldn't be simple. Her phone vibrated in her pocket. interrupting her thoughts. As she took out the phone, her heart sank as she received a message from her supervisor. Make sure you attend the meeting tomorrow. HR's presence is expected. The short message hit her like a punch. The wheels were still turning, and the chain of events was unfolding at a speed far beyond her ability to keep up. Catherine struggled to catch her breath. The excitement that had buoyed her throughout the flight had faded, leaving her feeling utterly exhausted. She realized her mistake, and now she would have to face the consequences. However, what worried her the most it wasn't just the fear of losing her job, but also the realization that she had acted on assumptions, biases, and prejudices, things she didn't even realize she was carrying. She made Marcus feel like an outsider. Now, everything in her life was falling apart. As the situation grew more serious, Catherine understood that she couldn't change her past actions. However, she could try to learn more from it. As she reflected on her circumstances, she realized that if she could get through this, she would make sure never to repeat the same mistakes again. But at that moment, she felt uncertain whether redemption was still within reach. The next morning, Catherine walked into the HR office, her heart full of anxiety. All night, she found herself replaying every detail of the previous day, a deep sense of regret creeping in as each hour passed. She had tried to mentally prepare for what was about to happen, but nothing could truly equip her for the reality of this situation. As she stepped into the sterile, windowless room, she was greeted by two senior HR representatives, their expressions very serious. Catherine, one of them called and gestured for her to sit down. We have reviewed your report and consulted with the relevant individuals. This is a serious matter, and the company is addressing it very seriously. Catherine nodded, her hands trembling slightly on her lap. The moment she feared had arrived. But it wasn't a surprise. The guilt over her choices washed over her, and she was prepared for the consequences as they outlined the possible disciplinary actions. She remained silent, her mind swirling with the gravity of her actions, rendering their words vague. They mentioned her temporary suspension while further review took place. But Catherine struggled to focus. Her mind was haunted by the deep sense of guilt weighing heavily on her heart. The meeting wrapped up quickly, and she left the room carrying the burden of the harsh truth about her actions. The uncertainty surrounding her future with the airline had become clear, and she realized she had to face the consequences. Later that day, as Catherine sat in her car, her phone buzzed once more. This time, it was an email from the airline's office. She opened it, her breath quickening as she read the message on the screen. James Carter had requested to meet with her. He wanted to discuss the matter in person. Her stomach dropped. She had been anticipating this moment, but nothing could truly prepare her for it. They called and gestured for her to sit down. We have reviewed your report and consulted with the relevant individuals. This is a serious matter, and the company is addressing it with the utmost seriousness. Catherine nodded, her hands trembling slightly on her lap. The moment she had feared had arrived. But it was not a surprise. The guilt over her choices washed over her, and she braced herself for the consequences. As they outlined the possible disciplinary actions, she remained silent, her thoughts swirling around the severity of her actions, making their words seem distant. They mentioned her temporary suspension while further review was conducted. But Catherine tried to focus. Her mind was haunted by a deep sense of guilt weighing down her heart. The meeting ended quickly, and she left the room carrying the burden of the harsh truth about her actions. The uncertainty surrounding her future with the airline became clear, and she realized she had to face the consequences. Later that day, as Catherine sat in her car, her phone buzzed again. This time, it was an email from the airline's office. She opened it, breathless as she read the message on the screen. James Carter had requested to meet with her. He wanted to discuss the incident in person. Her stomach dropped. She had been expecting this moment, but nothing could truly prepare her for it. She thought the board or HR would handle everything. But the uncertainty surrounding her future with the airline became clear, and she realized she had to face the consequences. Later that day, while sitting in her car, Catherine's phone buzzed again. This time, it was an email from the airline's corporate office. She opened it, her breath quickening as she read the message on the screen. James Carter had requested a meeting with her. He wanted to discuss the matter in person. She was overwhelmed as she read the message on the screen. James Carter had requested to see her. He wanted to discuss the incident in person. Her stomach sank. She had been waiting for this moment, but nothing could truly prepare her for it. She thought the board or HR would handle everything, but Marcus insisted on having a meeting himself. Catherine's thoughts spiraled. What did he want from her? What could she possibly say? The burden of facing the man she had publicly and deeply criticized was truly beyond her endurance. She took a deep breath and shifted the car into gear, knowing that she had to face him no matter what happened next. The weight of her mistake still lingered, but she felt this was her last chance to make things right. The meeting with James Carter was scheduled for the following afternoon. Catherine walked into the company headquarters, her anxiety growing with every step toward the modern conference room with glass walls, where their meeting was set to take place. She had never felt like such an outsider standing in front of the shiny doors of a conference room that seemed always out of reach. The receptionist greeted her politely, but the formality only made Catherine feel more uncomfortable. As she entered the room, Marcus was sitting at the large table, calm and composed. He glanced up as she walked in, their eyes meeting in a way that felt completely overwhelming. Catherine felt her throat tighten, overwhelmed by the weight of his stare. She had always faced difficulties head-on, but standing before the person she had hurt felt incredibly daunting. Facing difficult circumstances was one thing, but being in front of the person she had wronged felt profoundly scary. This was not just a misunderstanding, it was a mistake far beyond her expectations. "Please, have a seat," Marcus said, gesturing to the chair across from him. His tone was calm and steady. There was no sign of anger, no public judgment. However, Catherine sensed the clear authority he held in the room, aware that his choice could shape her future with the airline. She sat down, trying to steady her breath. A brief silence enveloped them before Marcus finally broke it with a calm and steady voice. "I know you're upset," he said clearly. "I'm not here to judge you for that. I'm curious about the reasons behind your decision," Catherine said, her heart racing as she searched for the right words. "I guess based on your appearance. You didn't seem fit for first class," she added gently. "I thought I did my job by addressing what I saw as a mistake." She hesitated, her voice trembling. "But I was wrong. I judged based on his looks, and in doing so, I lost him." Marcus nodded, his face revealing no emotion. "So, what lesson have you learned from this?" he asked with a sharp gaze. Catherine paused. "I realize that making assumptions can be very dangerous. Even the smallest biases can lead to devastating consequences. And respect is the basic courtesy we owe to everyone, regardless of their appearance or our ingrained beliefs." After a moment of silence, Marcus finally responded. "That's a good start," he remarked, his tone softening. "I believe in the power of second chances, but it's important to recognize the potential harm this situation could cause to the airline's reputation and my own experience. The next steps will depend on your willingness to take responsibility and how you choose to move forward from here." Catherine nodded, absorbing the seriousness of his message. Unsure if her apology would make a difference, she understood that this was her chance to demonstrate her growth and willingness to take responsibility for her actions. The meeting ended without a clear resolution. However, Marcus's final remarks gave Catherine a sense of cautious optimism. Acknowledging her mistakes, she understood that the road ahead would be filled with challenges. Yet, for the first time in days, she felt a glimmer of redemptive hope. Marcus had not completely shut her out, and just that alone gave her a feasible light she had been longing for. That night, in her apartment, Catherine sat in front of her laptop and reflected on their conversation. She began drafting a letter to Marcus, an official apology expressing her sincere regret for her actions and their consequences. While it might not be significant, It marked the beginning of her effort to prove that she had learned from her mistakes and was determined to improve. Herself. Her phone buzzed again, this time displaying a message from her manager at the airline. Marcus had chosen not to press charges. You are being reinstated, but you must complete sensitivity training and familiarize yourself with the company's diversity policies. This is your opportunity to make amends, so make the most of it. Catherine exhaled deeply, her breath uneven. She had been given a new chance. She had absorbed a hard but essential lesson, and while she recognized that the road ahead would be challenging, she remained resolute in her commitment to improve. This incident had left her deeply unsettled, but it also presented an opportunity to grow, learn, and transform into someone who would never let assumptions dictate her decisions again. After sending the apology letter to Marcus, she leaned back in her chair, feeling a bit lighter after the burden of the past few days. The journey ahead would be challenging. However, Catherine was ready to face it. She was no longer a woman defined by her past mistakes. Instead, she was determined to avoid repeating them. The story of James Carter and flight attendant Catherine offers a profound lesson. Don't judge people by their appearances. Catherine had mistakenly assumed that James, in his uniform, was not first class, only to discover that he owned the airline. This shows that biases can lead to poor decisions with serious consequences. In modern American society, this lesson remains highly relevant. America values individualism and equality, but biases still exist from the workplace to everyday life. Rushing to judge based on appearance, race, or profession can lead to discrimination, misunderstandings, and missed opportunities for connection. For example, in the workplace, respecting everyone, regardless of appearance, will help foster teamwork and innovation. In customer service, treating every customer fairly is key to maintaining. A good reputation is crucial to a business's success. Furthermore, the story highlights the importance of humility in learning from mistakes. Catherine's acknowledgement. Acknowledging our mistakes, apologizing, and committing to change reflect the values of responsibility and personal growth in America. In the age of social media, where mistakes can easily be exaggerated, recognizing our errors and striving for self-improvement is more important than ever. We should adopt an open mindset, avoiding rash judgments and being willing to correct our mistakes. This not only aligns with American culture, where diversity and opportunity are celebrated, but it also helps build a more tolerant and understanding society.